Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The United States has imposed new sanctions on Iran that target the country's petrochemical industry. Washington said the fresh embargoes were imposed on Tehran for financial support of its Revolutionary Guard Corps. The U.S. declared Iran's Revolutionary Guards a terrorist organization last month. The new sanctions amp up already escalated tensions as Washington mounts pressure on Tehran. The U.S. Treasury Department warned the international companies against dealing with Iran's petrochemical industries company. The company caters to 50% petrochemical exports of Iran. With the new sanctions, the firm and its subsidiaries have been completely banned from accessing the U.S. market. Moving on to India, where at least 26 people have been killed in severe dust storms and lightning in the country's northern Uttar Pradesh state. The storm destroyed houses and uprooted trees, leaving 50 others wounded. Mainpuri district bore the brunt, with 6 people killed by lightning and the collapse of a wall. Police said most injuries were caused by damage to mud houses and falling trees. And major power cuts have been reported in the state capital, Lucknow. The U.S. has indefinitely suspended the scheduled tariffs on all the Mexican goods. The tariffs were called off after Mexico agreed to take steps to contain the flow of illegal migrants across the American border. The U.S. and Mexico have signed an agreement 2 days before the tariffs were scheduled to take effect. U.S. President Donald Trump says Mexico has agreed to take strong measures to stem the movement of people. Mexico has also agreed to expand its policy of taking back migrants from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The country's Foreign Secretary, Marcelo Ebrard, has confirmed the deal in a tweet. Earlier, Trump threatened to impose an additional 5% import duty on all the Mexican goods. Moving on to Syria, where at least 39 militants have been killed in a Syrian government counter-attack launched on the edge of Idlib province. This was in response to the killing of 44 government soldiers in a rebel attack on the Idlib safe zone. Battles have intensified in Syria's northwest province after insurgents mounted an attack to repel an army offensive. War monitors say the assault comes during growing Syrian and Russian airstrikes in the region. The UN says the bombardment has forced 270,000 people out of their homes in the last month. Dozens of health facilities and schools have been among the targets hit. China and Russia have agreed to deepen their energy cooperation. Both the leaders have promised policy support to achieve their goals. Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have attended a bilateral energy business forum in St. Petersburg. Xi Jinping said energy cooperation is the most significant, fruitful, and most wide-ranging area of mutual cooperation. In his meeting with Putin, Xi Jinping presented a 4-point proposal. He stressed the need for mutual recognition and synergy, integration of interests and cooperation in global energy governance. Putin promised improved laws, regulations, and policies to create a favorable market environment. Putin pledged improved laws, regulations, and policies to create a favorable market environment. Russian President Vladimir Putin has accused Washington of spreading its jurisdiction around the world. He was speaking at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Here are the details.
The presidents of China and Russia put up a united front against Washington at the plenary session of the St. Petersburg Forum. Speaking at the event, Russian President Vladimir Putin accused the US of acting as a global policeman.
It is how the United States, I regret to say, that acts today. It extends their jurisdiction across the whole world. By the way, I already spoke about it 12 years ago. This model not only contradicts the normal logic of communication between nations, reality of a complex, multipolar world. Most importantly, it does not meet the challenges of the future.
Russian President Vladimir Putin also condemned Washington's belligerence against Huawei.
We are concerned that the destructive practice affects not only traditional markets, energy, commodity trade market, but is also shifting to new developing markets. For instance, the situation with Huawei, which is being not only pushed back, but unceremoniously forced out from the global market. In certain circles, they name it the first technology war of the coming digital era.
In defiance of US blacklisting, Chinese President Xi Jinping said Beijing was ready to share its 5G technology around the world.
China is ready to share technological inventions with all partners, in particular when it comes to 5G technology.
President Xi said integration of the Belt and Road initiative with the Eurasian Economic Union would benefit the whole region. He added the world's multilateral trade system must be protected.
Russia and the United States have blamed each other for a near collision between their warships in the Middle East China Sea. Both countries accuse the other of dangerous and unprofessional behavior. The USS Chancellor's Will came within 50 meters of the Russian destroyer Admiral Vinogradov, prompting emergency action to avoid a collision. The incident happened on Friday when a group of Russian warships were on a parallel course with the US Naval Strike Group. The US Navy said the behavior of the Russian ship was unsafe and unprofessional. This happened only days after Washington and Moscow spared over a US spy plane intercepted by a Russian fighter jet near Syria. In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of violating peace agreements, promising a tough response. The statement comes after 2 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in artillery shelling near the Donetsk region. Zelensky claimed the new flare-up means Russia is losing its grip on regional separatists. He called the attack an attempt to torpedo peace talks, which resumed in Belarusian capital Minsk on Wednesday. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indus. Welcome back. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has met Sudan's military rulers and opposition leaders in Khartoum. The United Nations has called for a prompt investigation into allegations of excessive force being used against the protesters. The African Union's Peace and Security Council suspended Sudan from all AU activities until a civilian government is formed. The opposition says the death toll in a military crackdown has risen to over 100. The United Nations has called for a human rights monitoring team to be sent to the country to examine allegations of rights violations. It wants to investigate the alleged involvement of ex-Janjaweed militia personnel in violence against protesters. The Janjaweed militia has been linked to systematic human rights abuses in the Darfur region. British Conservative Party leadership hopeful Boris Johnson has won a court case over his Brexit campaign claims. He challenged a legal summon on 3 counts of misconduct in public office. The London High Court threw out the attempt to prosecute Johnson for allegedly lying about Brexit during the EU referendum campaign. The case revolved around a claim Britain would be £350 million a week better off outside the EU. Businessman Marcus Ball tried to prosecute Johnson for misconduct in public office. The judges said they would give their reasoning for dismissing the case at a later stage. Spain's King Felipe has asked acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez to form a new government. The complex undertaking involves negotiations with many different parties. The king held meetings with representatives of the deadlocked parliamentary parties. In a press briefing, Sanchez said he will seek Parliament's approval to be sworn in as the premier. His Socialist Party won a general election in April but fell short of a majority. To win a first-round vote, Sanchez will need support from a full majority of lawmakers. Despite the horse trading, Sanchez is widely expected to begin a second term as the Prime Minister. U.S. House Democrats will vote on holding White House officials in contempt of Congress for ignoring a subpoena forcing them to give access to an redacted Mueller report on Russian election meddling. Attorney General William Barr and ex-White House counsel Don McGahn have refused to testify on special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe. If approved, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler can go to court to enforce the Trump officials' compliance. Democratic leaders intend to bring the measure to a vote in the full House on Tuesday. A redacted version of Mueller's inquiry into Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election was released in April. Protests have continued in Liberian capital Monrovia over President George Weah's failure to tackle corruption. The ex-footballer is under pressure 18 months into his presidency as thousands took to the streets. Riot police lined the streets of Monrovia, where more than 5,000 people turned out for one of the city's biggest protests. Demonstrators walked to Capitol Hill to present the government with a list of demands. George Weah, a football hero in Liberia, has been in power for less than 18 months. Since he became president, inflation has soared and growth has shrunk. The IMF says the government's wage bill is too high. 64% of Liberians live below the poverty line. In France, 3 marine rescuers have been killed in a boat accident off the country's western coast. A vessel carrying 7 marine rescuers capsized 800 meters from the seaside town of Les Sables-d'Olonne. They were answering a distress call from a fishing boat in difficulty due to a storm. 110 km/h winds have battered the French coastline. It has been a hazardous year for pedestrians, motorists and scooter riders alike in Paris. The city's mayor, Anne Hidalgo, has promised to improve the regulation of electric scooters, which she blames for the chaos. Here are the details.
If millions of children decide
no future, on a death.
What do we want?
Give life a chance. On a deathbed.
if millions of children decide
No future, on a death.
What do we want?
Give life a chance. On a deathbed.
Swedish teenage activist Greta Thunberg and her Fridays for Future global movement have won a Global Human Rights Award. Thunberg inspired millions of school students worldwide to skip school to protest for action on climate change. Last year, the UN warned output of greenhouse gases will have to be slashed over the next 12 years to stabilize the climate. And now moving on, in Afghanistan, harvest season has started for Afghanistan's poppy farmers. The country continues to fight what seems to be a losing battle against the drug trade. Here are the details.
Harvest season is a busy time for 20-year-old farmer Mohammed Ahmadi, but he isn't collecting wheat or corn. Instead, he is scratching poppies and collecting the pink sap they bleed. He's harvested opium for a living since he was 13 years old.
Nobody is interested in doing this job. I wanted to continue my studies, but economic issues have forced me to do this business. Also, the government is not paying attention to us.
A poppy farmer can earn $135 each harvesting season, a significant sum in Afghanistan. The average Afghan worker makes approximately $760 a year.
The poppy harvest season lasts for 18 to 19 days. During this period, when we work on the fields, the owner of the poppy land gives us money or poppy sap as our wage, and then we cover our family needs with it.
The head of the Kandahar Counter-Narcotics Directorate, Gul Muhammad Shukran, says there's been a 42% decrease in poppy production in 2019, but eradicating production altogether is impossible.
I urge the farmers not to cultivate poppy, which is an ugly phenomenon and can cause troubles and lead to addictions in our families and people.
Half of Afghan opium is produced in areas with high levels of militant activity. It makes cracking down on drug production very difficult. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime says in 2018, 6,400 metric tons of opium were produced in 263,000 hectares of land. The Afghan Taliban famously outlawed opium cultivation in 2000 when they ruled the country.
Children at Luzor camp in the war-ravaged Central African Republic have chosen to sketch their suffering to fight post-traumatic stress disorder. They draw what they see in their daily life to express their thoughts. Details follow. It's a famous saying that a picture worth 1,000 words. An imagery conveys human feelings in a more elaborative way. Central African Republic has seen lots of tragedies and destruction during its civil war. The gruesome events had adversely affected the younger generation of the country. To help the children manage their trauma, they are being taught to draw their worst memory.
What made me draw this picture is that my father and I were going to Mbaya district, and then he was burned at home by an alliance of rebel militia groups, and when I fled, I saw a body in the water.
Mothers of children affected from PTSD said that sketching exercise has positive results on their mental health.
Every night he has nightmares. When I ask him for a favor, when I can't work, he refuses. He says he is not a mule, so I argue with him over it. But since this workshop, we understand each other better.
4/5 of the Central African Republic is under the control of militias created to protect different ethnic groups. According to UN, thousands lost their lives and nearly 650,000 fled their homes during years-long violence. The US space agency NASA says private citizens could fly to the International Space Station as soon as next year. NASA's contractors, Boeing and SpaceX, will set the cost of civilian space tourism. Here are the details.
NASA says it will open the International Space Station to space tourism and other commercial ventures. Private astronauts could holiday in the orbiter for up to 30 days using US spacecraft.
NASA is opening the International Space Station to commercial opportunities and marketing these opportunities as we've never done before. We're announcing the ability for private astronauts to visit the space station on U.S. vehicles and for companies to engage in commercial profit-making activities on the station.
The American Space Agency is not the first to do this. Its Russian counterpart, Roscosmos, has already allowed fare-paying private citizens into the station. NASA's officials say opening the door to private enterprise gives the agency more room to focus on returning to the moon by 2024.
So we expect to see the first crewed test flight to station probably by the end of this year, by the end of 2019. Then that sets us up for that earliest possible date for the private astronaut mission sometime in the 2020 timeframe. So that's where we stand.
Up to now, NASA has banned the commercial use of the space station and prevented its astronauts from taking part in research for profit.
Lows and the highs of the business world now. The world's top 20 economies have agreed to set tighter taxation rules for digital giants like Google and Facebook. The pledge was made by finance ministers and central bank governors at the G20 meeting in Japan. In a draft communique ahead of the conference, they called for a globally fair and sustainable international tax system. Britain's finance minister stressed tech giants need to pay their fair share of international taxes.
We have a strong consensus, so now we need to
totally different economic model that
members and 129 members don't require them to pay. Minister of Finance of Indonesia will have a chance to have a sum of national taxations in.
We have a strong consensus, so now we need to
totally different economic model that
highly digitalized business.
My own comments of the moment.
就是使新规则保证
Time to take a look at the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. Stay tuned to Indus News for further updates.